Hi, thanks again for your patience. My name is Nerea Hoft. I'm the Marketing Associate here at Collins Group, and I'm sitting here on this sunny Seattle day with James Plourde, Senior Consultant. And then we also have Carrie Dahlquist, who is the Director of Strategic Information Systems at our parent company, Campbell & Company, who's joining us as well. So welcome to everyone. Thanks for being here today. I would like to mention that we are recording this entire webinar. The slides and the audio will be available for download from our website, most likely later today, if not tomorrow. And then there'll also be some resources that you can download. Everyone who's registered for this webinar will get a follow-up email from me with all of those links and information. So I'll turn it over to Carrie and James and let them tell you a little bit more about themselves. Over to you.
All right, thanks, Nerea. So I'm James Plourde, and I am a senior consultant here at Collins Group, as Nerea said. Sorry, we're trying to get up the slide there we go. I'm the guy in the top right corner, so we want to make sure you don't get the two of us confused. I've been at Collins Group for about 3 years now, worked in the nonprofit sector for more years than I care to admit. And really why I'm excited about this webinar is over my career, I've really seen firsthand the importance of data management and really seen it evolve over the years to where it is today and how it really can serve as an asset in our work. Carrie, I'd like you to introduce yourself and tell a little bit about your background.
Great, thanks, James. Well, my name is Carrie Dahlquist. I'm the Director of Strategic Information Services at Campbell & Company. I've been in the nonprofit sector for over 15 years now. Again, those are creeping up faster than I realized. But I've had a variety of roles in strategic planning and campaign management. I've done annual fund management, and I've been a major gift officer. And I think, much like you, James, what I found very, very interesting over the course of my time in the nonprofit sector is how much I've come to rely on data and analysis of that information in relevant and meaningful ways to really help drive and inform decision making. And it didn't matter sort of what role I was in. I've seen it crop up over and over and over again. So I'm really excited to be able to have a dialogue today about that.
And as many of you may know, Collins and Campbell & Company joined forces in fall of last year. And we're very, very fortunate to have Carrie and her Strategic Information Services team assisting us with our clients here in the Northwest. It's really added a dimension to what we're able to offer, and we're very fortunate to have Carrie's services available. So the next we have our first of two polls. Now that you know a little bit about us, Nerea, why don't we ask our first poll question?
Okay, so this first poll is just to get a little bit more information about you.
So if you could just take a moment to select one of the answers that are up there. If you're a professional researcher, frontline development officer, and another development professional, CEO, executive director, or volunteer and board member. That'll give us a little bit of a better sense of who we are directing our presentation to.
Great. So it looks like about 60% of you are some sort of development professional. Second to that are frontline gift officers and frontline fundraisers. And then about 11% of you are professional researchers and data analysts. So we'll keep that in mind as we talk. And 10% are volunteer board members or some other kind of thing. And then 7% CEOs and executive directors. Thanks for sharing that information.
Thank you. And that split really fits well into our presentation today. So here are some of our goals. You know, data is such a complex area to explore, and we really want to look at the different kinds of data and their value. And you know, we want to make clear up front that this isn't just a way to tell you how to go out and purchase data analytics services. There's a lot that you can do in-house as well that's very effective. So we want to explore all the different kinds of data and their value. Really important to learn how to interpret the results. If you do a data analysis, again, either in-house or using an outside firm, all of which goes into building a prospect pipeline. And just as important, and actually my favorite thing, is using data to help develop tailored strategies. I just find that especially in major gift work, really every potential donor is a campaign of one. And the use of analytics and data to help us develop those strategies is so important. And lastly, some steps for developing a data plan, because you know, once you do this once in terms of doing a data screening, the game's not over, and we need to keep building from there. Just a quick background on the philanthropic landscape, and this came from the most recent was it greater?
Giving USA?
Giving USA. Thanks, Nerea.
You're welcome.
I had a blank there. So as you can see, individuals making up such a predominant part of the wheel, and foundations at 15%. Many of them are also family foundations. So really, individuals are such an important part of the development pipeline. This other one is a different way of telling the data, but what really struck me in looking at this graph is the light blue bars represent recessionary years. And when you look back from 1972 to current, they come along at a pretty regular clip. I think every time we get out of a recession, we think, well, that's over. But, you know, it's only a matter of time before the next one comes. And again, the more that we can shore up our donors in the good years, the better off we'll be in those recessionary years as well. So I want to talk a little bit about current trends in philanthropy. And as you all know, institutions are becoming more and more reliant on philanthropy. Governmental sources of funding for all kinds of institutions are decreasing. Corporate dollars, you know, the line between the philanthropic arm of a corporation and the marketing arm are becoming thinner and thinner. So really, the corporate dollars are tied more to strategic business objectives than ever. Foundation funding is expected to remain flat for the next year, and many are not taking on new grantees or are becoming more selective in who they want to take on. And again, individuals continuing to be the best source of philanthropic support. And just like with other businesses, the use of data and developing that prospect pipeline is becoming a more integral part in how decisions are made and projections are being made as well. So what does that all mean to us? Well, we have to put our time to the best use. We have to figure out a protocol of how do we know who to call first. We have our donors, but how do we prioritize our time? Who are those what I call hidden gems in the database? Maybe people that have given to you a small amount over time, but you have no idea of their philanthropic capacity. How do we pull out planned giving prospects, those who have given maybe small amounts but loyally over a long period of time? As I said before, data is driving all the world's businesses, and even more so getting into the philanthropic arena. And to do all that, we need to develop a solid data plan so that we can stay focused and strategic. So I'm turning it over to Carrie now, who's going to talk a little bit about, oh, hang on a second here. Another poll. This one got put in.
Okay.
So let's go to that one. Here we're trying to get a sense of who in the audience has done any kind of a donor analytics in the last while, so we know whether you've how engaged you are. So here's the poll. When was the last time you performed some kind of prospect research within your database? So if you could select if you've done it in the past 12 months, 2 to 3 years ago, 3 to 5 years ago, 5 years ago, or never. And we're talking very broadly here, so we're talking about any kind of going into your database, and doing an analysis of some sort in order to help you achieve your strategic objectives. So,
well, you guys are pretty good. It looks like 60% have done some sort of prospect research in the past 12 months, which makes sense. That's why you're here today.
yeah.
And about 25% said never. I meant to update that one to say never / I don't know or don't remember. So I'll lump you in that category as well.
All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Carrie and her little section here, data everywhere, but who knows what to think. So Carrie, why don't you help unpack this landscape for us?
Yeah, that's a tall order and not a lot of time. I think the goal for today is to really just sort of give an overview of various kinds of information that's out there, and we just wanted to acknowledge first before we sort of dive in that there's a lot of different kinds of information out there. The topics that you see listed on this screen are just the ones that we're going to review today, and I'm certain that there are others that we could delve into as well. And I think the point of this exercise is to really arm you with some information, and I think more importantly, help you, empower you to think about what is your strategic objective, what are you trying to accomplish with this information, how is it going to drive the program forward. So I think we just wanted to acknowledge, right there in the center, that we want you to think about what your goal is, because obviously there's a lot of different kinds of information, and they come at varying price points. So we want to be strategic and thoughtful about why we're pursuing different kinds. So whether that's, you want to bolster your pipeline, or you want to think about your annual fund, or maybe you want to get into email and you haven't done that before, and there might be a different path for that as well. So just be thoughtful as we begin to unpack these various sources, what is it that you're trying to accomplish. With that, we'll dive right in. I wanted to just spend a moment talking about data appends before we get into the various ways that you can use information. Wanted to acknowledge that there are opportunities, and this is, typically that's something that's done through a vendor, but there are opportunities to essentially bolster the information that you have at your fingertips. And I think a lot of organizations are already familiar with and are conducting the National Change of Address updates, those NCOA updates. But I just wanted to acknowledge that there's a lot of different kinds of information that you can access out there in the public arena that can really help. It can really help you access individuals, and at least for the purposes of our conversation today, can help validate and increase the effectiveness of the data that you have in your database. For example, if you're going to pursue screening and/or predictive modeling, which we'll talk about in a minute, having accurate address information is really, really critical. And so, you might need to pursue those NCOA updates, or even those long lost addresses if there's a population that you're interested in sort of re-engaging. Likewise, if you want to really dive into telefund or email campaigns, there are opportunities, or you want to, be exploring your plan giving opportunities. Maybe you want to think about an age Append. So there's a lot of information out there that can help you. Again, once you think through what your goals for your various programs are, data appends might be the first consideration you want to give before you dive into the other sources of information that we're going to explore next.
And Carrie, how often would you recommend an organization do something like this after they've done it once and gotten these updates?
Well, I think it depends. Again, I don't mean to not answer your question, James, but I think it depends on the goal and how aggressive you want to be. and frankly which Appends we're talking about. If you're talking about NCOA updates, there are organizations that do those on a quarterly basis. You know, for some organizations that might not make sense, but I would say you want to be doing it at least annually. Mm-hmm. And for these other Appends, emails and phones and age, I think it's dependent on how you're prioritizing those various kinds of engagement strategies. So if you really want to be focused next year on email Appends, you're going to want to make sure that you do that first and you do it again at least annually. In particular, if you're the kind of organization that has influxes of constituents.
Hi, Carrie. Can I interrupt just for a second? We had a question about what does NCOA stand for?
Sure. That's National Change of Address Updates. So you do those. You can do those through your vendors. Some of you might be doing them through your direct mail vendors, and some of you might be doing them the old-fashioned way, essentially through the post office. But when people move, they update their addresses with the post office, and now that information is shared and can be updated electronically.
Thanks, Carrie.
Great. So we're going to talk quickly about electronic screening, and my guess is that a lot of our audience members are familiar with this. This service is sort of what we think about when we think about traditional prospect research, and the focus in electronic screening is that publicly available information when we're talking about wealth and hard assets, career and philanthropic connections. So anything that's out there in the public arena that, you know, we've got a variety of vendors who specialize in this kind of activity, and they're essentially all accessing similar, if not the same, resources. And so it's, you know, it's a matter of personal preference in some cases, and frankly, you know, they may roll the information up slightly differently, but the underlying information is very similar. And the goal of electronic screening, or hard asset screening as some people call it, is to come away with an idea of somebody's essentially net worth, or their total estimated assets, that you can take a percentage of and come up with a major giving capacity, which is the amount that a prospect might be capable of giving to all of their philanthropic priorities or interests, typically over a 5-year period, or sort of representing a major gift pledge. I think it's really, really important that we acknowledge that those major giving capacities can be really, really helpful and really, really insightful, but they are, at best, they are sort of directional indicators. Again, this is based on publicly available information, and you know, depending on the constituent and depending on how good they are at hiding their wealth, you won't see the full picture. So I find these exercises to be very, very helpful, but we understand that we're talking about, you know, sort of the baseline or a minimum of their major giving capacity, because there's certainly additional capacity that wasn't borne out through the screening. I think, you know, it's also really important to remember that because of that, manual confirmation, or what we like to call sort of verifying and vetting, that hard asset screening is going to be really important as you are able to confirm additional pieces about somebody's asset picture or puzzle. You can drive up their major giving capacity. So if you can confirm somebody's, you know, real estate, or you can confirm their securities, or any number of other pieces of information, the total amount of their estimated wealth goes up, and therefore their major giving capacity goes up. And then I think, you know, what we spend a lot of time doing at Campbell & Company when we're looking at this information is allowing it to help inform a bigger picture about the capacity of a prospect pool. And, you know, we can take that information, roll it up, and map it against a gift table, whether that's a campaign gift table or campaign pyramid or an annual gift table, and then, you know, to really begin to think about the gaps at these various gift levels. So, you know, if you need additional prospects at the $100,000 range, or, you know, the $25,000 range, it can be really helpful to sort of see that summarized, and then you can use, you know, some of these other approaches to go out and be strategic and proactive about getting those additional prospects. And again, all of that to say, and James mentioned this earlier, that this is one of those activities that can really help you prioritize your major gift prospects, and help you think through which prospects you want to focus your limited time and energy on, you know, developing those engagement strategies, those also important engagement strategies. Next, we're going to talk about RFM scoring. This stands for recency, frequency, and monetary scoring. It's a marketing technique. You can see right there it's used to prioritize and segment prospects by developing a score. The advantages of RFM is that it's very, very simple. You can do this in-house. It's sort of the precursor to predictive modeling, and it can be informative. It's not quite as strategic, I would say, as predictive modeling, which we'll talk about in a minute, but it can give you a really nice gut check on, who are the people that are most engaged with your organization. And again, you can do it in an Excel spreadsheet. So I think that's a real benefit to this. And just to let you know, we will be sharing, I think, Norea, we've got a handout later today on how you can actually do this type of scoring. So if you have questions, you can feel free to follow up with us, and we'll be happy to help you out. I think, James, we're going to have you talk for a minute about peer screening. Is that right?
Yeah, sort of as a takeoff of the RFM. And again, I encourage you to download the sample that we're going to have at the end of the webinar, so you get to put your teeth in that a little bit more if you haven't heard about it. But peer screening, this is something maybe many of us have done, and I think there's great value of this, and I don't want it to get lost in this more sophisticated models of doing data analysis. But basically looking at lists of donors, potential donors, and having a your development committee, or what I call your insider volunteers, reviewing that list. And it's just a great way of getting intelligence on your donors. Something as simple as whether the person has recently sold his or her business, whether there's a family difficulty that we need to be sensitive to in terms of making an approach. It's sort of that great next step of finding your top donor list and then refining it into more detailed strategies. It's a great way of asking volunteers for suggested capacity of your potential donors, and also, just as important, learning who volunteers know and may be willing to contact. And also, one of the things that we haven't really held up, but I want to do so now, is it's not only who we as development officers should be seeing, it's which of those prospects should we be putting on our president or CEO's list. Typically they have, their time needs to be used the most focused and the most beneficial to the organization. So how do we craft that list so that it's the most effective possible? Who do we assign to the next tier down, maybe to our vice president, then to our major gift staff? Who's best for a contact with an annual fund ask, and then again, planned giving. So this is just a way, again, to use our volunteers to further hone that list. So Carrie's going to talk a little bit more about predictive modeling.
Yep. And I think, predictive modeling, if electronic screening is what we think of when we think about kind of the historic or the traditional prospect research, I think predictive modeling is sort of the new wave of prospect research. And you can do this through the vendors, and if you have a larger shop or sort of the right person who's got the right set of interests, you can do this to some degree in-house. So there's a lot of flexibility with predictive modeling. The goal of predictive modeling is really to think through a question that you have and to design a problem set, or design an approach to solve the question. So typically we spend a lot of time talking about who are our most likely major gift prospects, or plan giving prospects, or annual giving prospects. So the question is, how do we identify those people who are most likely to make a gift of X type? And in predictive modeling, you can look to build profiles of sort of your standard or ideal major gift prospect, or plan giving prospect, or annual giving prospect. And what happens is you get out of the hundreds of data points that you likely have in your system through predictive modeling, and there are a number of different kinds of predictive modeling, but through predictive modeling you can cull down the hundreds of data points or characteristics that you could look at to those that influence the profile the most. In other words, maybe it turns out that your people who are most likely to make major gift prospects live close to public transportation, or come out of a particular grad era, or maybe they're current parents, or maybe they were members before they became donors. So there's a lot of different ways that this information can take you, but it can be very, very insightful, and it can help you really focus on the right people, and again, use your limited resources. If you think through, for example, you want to be doing a direct mail piece, an annual fund campaign, but you want to be really, really mindful because of resources. You want to be really mindful about spending, your budget dollars only on those people that look like they are the most likely to be able to respond to a direct mail, a letter or an email or a phone call. And so you can really use this to help sort of target various groups of people and, again, focus on the right people, those who are most likely to respond. I think this is also really, really helpful when we're talking about upgrade and segmentation strategies, which, again, this is that also important idea of developing strategies. You can develop strategies first and foremost for major gift prospects, but I think it's really important to remember that for those people who aren't going to be individually managed, we can develop segmentation and engagement strategies for populations of people if we can segment them appropriately. So predictive modeling can really help do that. And again, you have the option to go through an external vendor, or to some degree, if you've got the sophistication within your shop, you can do this in-house as well. So we're going to move on now to prospect research. And I think prospect research, this is an area that I spend a lot of time talking about. It's sort of a kind of a blanket, kind of catch-all. And I think frankly, prospect research, I'm very happy to say prospect research, I think is becoming more and more validated in recent years. I think the value of this function and the value of the information that can be produced is really, really important. There are a couple of different kinds of prospect research, and I'm sure many of our audience members already know this, but I want to take a quick moment to talk first and foremost about reactive prospect research, kind of that traditional prospect research, where in this case we might be talking about developing profiles on top prospects. I think we've got a lot of talent in the fundraising arena focused on this exercise. When they're allowed to focus on this exercise, I think prospect research is often one of those functions that is kind of pulled in a lot of different directions, and therefore, we say it's a priority, but allowing a prospect research the time that they need to be able to develop those profiles or those qualification briefs is really, really critical. I think acknowledging that sometimes these functions can be full-time people, sometimes they're part-time functions, they could be shared or even outsourced. So there's a lot of different ways that you can get this information, and I think it depends on whatever makes sense for your time and your budget and your staffing within the organization. But figuring out what your capacity for prospect research is really, really important, and I think dedicating the resources to be able to explore it can be really, really helpful. The other kind of prospect research that I think is becoming, again, more and more important and more valued is the idea of proactive prospect research or prospect identification. And I think, this, much like kind of predictive modeling, where we don't necessarily know who those top prospects are going to be, those most likely major gift prospects or plan giving prospects when we start the predictive modeling exercise. It's very similar when we're talking about prospect identification. So in this exercise, unlike those profiles where you go to your prospect researcher and you hand them a list and you say, here are our top prospects, and kind of give me everything you can find. Again, usually using publicly available resources. Give me everything you can find on them and write them up in a short form, a long form, whatever your template suggests for your organization. In prospect identification, we're asking a totally different question. We're saying, who else out there looks like they could be potential prospects for our organization. They may not even be in your database right now. So in this case, you want to be looking at, who's giving to other like organizations, or who are those community leaders that you may have an opportunity to tie in. And this can be really helpful when I've talked about the gaps a little while ago. When you're able to think about the capacity of your prospect pool and you're able to map it against your gift table or your campaign pyramid, and if there are gaps, if there are levels where you say, I really need more $25,000 donors or $100,000 or $1 million donors, this prospect identification exercise can be really, really helpful to help you think through where those people may exist. And certainly leveraging the peer screening that James was talking about a moment ago can be really helpful as well. I think eventually, the goal here is to be able to provide relationship managers and those natural partners with the critical information they need to go out and have conversations and promote engagement.
Carrie, I just want to chime in here with a couple of things. I've been a supervisor of major gift teams in the past, and prospect research is definitely a valuable tool, but don't be careful of it becoming a reason for major gift officers to not go see people because they, quote unquote, don't have enough information on the prospect yet. Prospect research is a great tool, but it's perfection is never attainable, and so we're never going to have the perfect number or perfect amount of information on a potential donor. So it's an aid as opposed to something that's going to keep somebody in their seats. And the second thing is that I'm also, I like to go armed with a lot of information, but just be sensitive to the person on the other side of the table that you're talking to. And, on the one hand, you want to appear knowledgeable, but on the other hand, you don't want to appear like you know every single detail about their life. And really, that's part of what natural engagement is to learn information about somebody. So I just want to throw out those two sort of caveats, at least in my experience of using prospect research.
No, I think that's great, and I think just following up on your first point, I think the idea of really leveraging the philanthropic life cycle and understanding prospect stages and really being disciplined about the type of prospect research that's available at each one of those stages is really, really important. In other words, you need a totally different level of research when you're finally going to somebody and you're going to make that big solicitation versus you're just going out to qualify somebody. And if you're just going out to qualify somebody and have a first conversation, you can probably find out everything you need to know about them in a 5-minute Google search yourself. And again, I think that will help to prioritize those limited prospect research resources. And I think you're absolutely right, James. We want to make sure that we're empowering our frontline to get out there and have these very important conversations that can be used to springboard additional prospect research. And as we move through the prospect life cycle and as we move the people through the various stages, I think it can be more and more important.
Thanks.
So now I'm gonna quickly just acknowledge that we've got a lot of different things to consider when you're talking about these various types of information. There are advantages and disadvantages, and again, as Nuria said, you're going to be able to download this this PowerPoint. So I won't spend a lot of information or a lot of time going over this piece by piece, but just want to acknowledge that we all have different levels of skill set. We all have different amounts of financial resources as in time, and you have to weigh those when you think through engaging a vendor to do a screening or a modeling project or outsourcing prospect research or bringing a prospect researcher in-house. And there's a lot of consideration that needs to go into how we make those decisions. And these are just some of the advantages and disadvantages to consider.
And what I really like about this chart, Carrie, and check me on this, but on the left-hand side, it really talks about most of the terms that are used in this whole prospect research electronic screening world. I think one of the things that I always felt at a disadvantage is not being a technology person. I don't really know what these different terms mean. And so when I'm trying to sit down with a vendor or somebody and have an intelligent conversation, I almost feel like we're talking two different languages. So it's just a good check on what these different terms mean, and again, what the advantages and disadvantages are.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the other thing I want to mention, I didn't when we were talking about prospect research, is that we'll actually have a resource list of prospect research resources, both those that are free and available to the public and those that you can purchase. That will be one of our downloads later on today.
Right. Thanks, Carrie. So again, just to sort of wrap up, is that really what our goal is to take analysis and move it to action. You know, perfection is not the objective. I can remember sitting around with major gift officers and looking over electronic screening and having arguments over whether somebody's home is really worth, you know, $500,000 or $750,000, or you know, that the research might come back that they own a boat, and somebody says, well, they sold their boat. I mean, don't get down into those, mired in those details. I mean, it's not the objective. It's not perfect. It just gives you a sense of how to order your time. You know, really moving to inform strategic action. And then lastly, the last bullet point, I was at a presentation of a predictive modeling presentation, and at the end, the facilitator said, after delivering all the information, the only mistake you can make is not using the data analysis. And it is amazing that people will go through this time and effort and energy, get the data, and then either not use it or just use the very, very top end of it. It is such a valuable and rich resource. So really, you can't mess it up. The only way you can is just, you know, like I say, not using the data. So as we kind of
and I would say, if I could
go, Carrie.
That, James, I think if you've been able to convince your organizational leadership that investing in whichever piece of this, or multiple pieces, because the other thing I should mention is that a lot of this information can be really, really helpful when used in concert, you know, when you use them together. But once you've convinced your organizational leadership to make the investment and spend the time and spend the dollars, and just sort of spend the organizational attention on this, it's really, really important to be able to show the results and show how that's going to, you know, be able to shape your decision making around a program, or, you know, be able to show that return on investment, or show that you've been able to, you know, segment and target your annual giving prospects, or, you know, maybe you've been able to rebalance portfolios because you now know more about the capacity of your top prospects. But I think, you know, being able to report back to leadership on that investment is really, really critical. And if you're able to do that successfully, it will be easier and easier to be able to get those resources as you move forward.
That's great. Thanks, Carrie. You know, we want to give time for questions, so I just want to give a quick case study as to how Carrie and I worked together with a client, a nonprofit in the Northwest, to use a predictive modeling electronic screening. So this particular client was launching a campaign, and they were in the phase of the campaign of launching the lead gifts. The board gifts phase was ending, and they felt they had a good sense of who was on their board, who had given, you know, their assets, etc. So we really didn't need it for that group of donors. But as that group was winding up, they had a very large database, and they had not done any screening of any kind for quite some time. So, you know, basically now that the board gifts are done, who do we go to next? Who's our next group? And so it's a very common, you know, problem that nonprofits face, especially in a campaign. So we took them through a screening and predictive modeling exercise, and you know, this was a professionally done service, and they did this modeling, and what they came back with was a group of Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 donors. Tier 1 donors were donors who are capable of giving $1 million or above. 2 was, I believe, 250 to that million, and 3 was 250 and below. So obviously a lot in that group 3. And of course, as you would imagine, in Tier 1, you know, they pretty much knew all the names. They were their tried and true donors. But there were 2 to 3 people that they had just didn't know. That again, those people that were in their database had given small gifts over the years, but had tremendous wealth capacity. And we took those 2 or 3, did some more detailed wealth screening. With one, we found that it was really her husband had been the donor of record, if you will, but she was widowed, but no one had been in touch with her. So we developed a strategy around that, and also around those other hidden gems, and also assigned to the CEO people out of the Tier 1 group. And then in the Tier 2 group, we did the same thing. Again, that was, many known, but a lot more unknown. Really helped to build the major gift stat portfolio. Pulled out a few names that we were also able to assign to the CEO. And all I can say is stay tuned on the Tier 3, because we haven't gotten to that point yet. But really, it was a benefit in order to, as I said, pick out those hidden gems, prioritize major gift portfolios, and really have a meaningful effort to get into the lead gifts phase of the campaign. So really, what does it take? Is just in sort of summation. Obviously, it takes a commitment. You know, as Carrie and I have indicated, a lot of this can be done on your own, but you also have to weigh the amount of your time it's going to take versus hiring it out. So it takes commitment. You know, it takes the resources, financial talent, and an allocation of your time. In some cases, it does require a bit of a culture shift in the organization in order to see the value of this. But, you know, as with so much of development, the investment just so far outweighs the benefit. If you can get a couple of major gift donors into the fold who you wouldn't have known otherwise, the money that it would take to do an electronic screening is well worth it. And also is a great way to involve your volunteers and senior management and involve them in a way that's really meaningful in terms of helping to reach those people who really have the ability to move your organization forward. So, Carrie, why don't you take us through this ladder of next steps, and then we'll take questions.
Sure. No, it looks pretty simple right here on the screen. I think that we want to acknowledge that, you know, this takes a little bit of time to do right, and in step 1, you really need to think through your data plan. And again, if we go back to the beginning of this presentation, really thinking through what are your goals, developing that data plan, educating your stakeholders. I think for some of you, you probably have organizational leadership that are going to jump right on this and see the value, and for others, it might be a bit more of a learning curve and a conversation. But however you get there, you need to convince the stakeholders and assemble the resources, and then, you know, let's move into action. Whether it's in-house RFM screening as a first step, or whether it's contacting a vendor, or in some cases probably contacting many vendors if you're interested in screening or modeling. There are a number of very reputable vendors out there who can help you with that. Or, you know, posting that prospect research position or outsourcing it to an appropriate firm. And then I think it's really important, as I mentioned earlier, to track and analyze the results. You really want to be able to show the value of the investment. And we spend a lot of time talking about metrics and evaluating our programs. And I believe, and sort of related to this topic, we're going to share a list of metrics that you might want to be thinking about as you think about analyzing and tracking results. So that will be one of the resources available to you later today as well. But however you do that, you want to be sharing that information back with leadership and reporting back to stakeholders. That's it. Easy enough, right, James?
That's it. That's it. Bing, bang, boom. You're done.
And then start over again.
And start over again. So thanks, Carrie. And if we didn't make this clear enough, I'm in Seattle. Carrie's in Chicago. So we're doing our best to tag team this without stepping on each other's toes too much. So now it's your turn. We've got about 12 minutes left in our time here. And why don't you type in, how do they ask questions, Norea?
So there should be a questions box in that panel to the right of your screen where you can type me a question, and then I will read it to Carrie and James. And I apologize in advance if we don't get to your question. We do keep a record of all questions asked and try to follow up with each of you after the webinar. So here we go. The first question is from Lori, and she says, we're a small nonprofit, a women's transitional housing, but are on the verge of expanding. How do you apply these techniques for a small organization in a small community to start and then expand regionally?
Well, let me take a stab at that first, and then Carrie, maybe you can chime in. I really think that all of this is scalable. I mean, you know, if you've been in the game at all and have any kind of a record of donors, you know, you can even just, as I said, bring that list to your board, to your development committee, and begin matching volunteers with prospects, getting people more engaged, developing engagement strategies. You know, knowing who's on your list is only half the battle. The next question is, what are you going to do with them? How do you get them to touch your mission? And even if you have, you know, you're at a place with no donors, you have your board, and that is your first group of donors, or should be. So I would really say start there and then build out. And if you have a list of donors that you've been keeping over the years, you know, to invest in just a simple electronic screening to get a sense of who has assets, who has the wealth, might be a good way to go. What do you think, Carrie? Anything to add?
Yeah, I think you've touched on the major points that I would say. I would just add that that you don't have to work across an entire database. I think to James' point, this is scalable. You could do your own RFM analysis to kind of cull to the top those people that look like they're the most interesting, and you could take 80 people and have them screened. If you could have a database of 800,000 people, or 8,000, or 800. But you know, you can select how many you ultimately want to have screened, or want to have you know, prospect research you know, help inform those strategies. So I think you can absolutely start small. You can prioritize in-house, and there are, you know, resources available to you to help inform the information about assets.
Great. We got another one, Norea?
Yeah, a couple people asked about RFM, and really quickly I just want to say that RFM stands for recency, frequency, and monetary, and it's just a simple kind of scoring method where you can assign a donor a certain numerical score based on how recently they gave, how frequently they give, and how much they gave. And it's a good way to kind of segment your donor database. A research associate here at Collins Group recently did a really great blog post about this, RFM scoring and how to get started. So I will include a link to that blog post in the follow-up email later today.
That's great.
We also got a flurry of questions basically related to the same subject, which is what are good professional development resources, what are the programs and websites that researchers can use, and are things like Prospect Point and Wealth Point by Blackbaud good investments? So all great questions, kind of the same theme.
I'll let you handle that one, Carrie.
Great. I mean, there's a lot of questions packed into that question. I think I can answer the first piece very quickly. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to have a list of prospect research resources for your review, and in that you'll see a list of of resources that are free, open, and accessible to the public, as well as resources that are subscription-based, or you have to contact a vendor to be able to explore. I think the question related to prospect point or research point, I think you're talking about online prospect research database tools, and there are a number of them out there depending on which vendor you're interested in. And I think they can absolutely be effective ways to get further information on groups of prospects. The nice thing about them, obviously they are subscription based, so they do cost money, but and it depends on the package that you opt into. But the nice thing is that a lot of those give you the ability to do ad hoc searches or one-off searches, so you don't have to screen your entire database, and you don't have to wait until this time next year when you typically do your screening. So if you've got an event coming up and you learned 5 new names of people that are coming, you can do a deeper dive into those people prior to the event. Or if you have an incoming class of students and you want to learn more about their parents, those tools give you the ability to do some research on them without having to do a full-on wealth screening.
I just would add that again, take into account how much of your time you want to spend on this versus and what that's going to cost, and factor that in, because sometimes the cheaper alternative may not be the most effective use of your staff's time. Leave it there.
Great. Another question. This one's from Rudy. Are there differences between using these metrics locally versus regionally versus nationally?
What do you think, Carrie?
No, I mean, I'm not sure exactly which metrics we're talking about, so I'll just sort of take a general approach to that question. We're talking about capacity. There are regional differences. For example, $1 million house in San Francisco isn't sort of worth the same value, if you will, as $1 million house in, let's say, Des Moines, Iowa. And I think it is really important that you be able to balance, to know a little bit about those regional differences and in particular their impact on capacity. If we're talking about those vendor tools, the nice thing is you can adjust how sensitive you are in particular to real estate. So I think that can be really, really helpful. Outside of that, if we're talking about metrics, broadly speaking, I think generally you can apply a similar set of metrics across regions and nationally. And again, the resources that we're going to share later can help you get started as you think about metrics.
Thanks, Carrie.
Simple question here. Where do you go to find the NCOA?
There's a lot of different resources, and that is one of the things that's on our sheet for later today. So we'll walk you through how to access that information if you don't want to do it through a vendor.
Right.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. So the last one from Nicholas. What about international prospect research?
Yeah, I'll start on that, and then you could go, Carrie. I think a lot of these sources that research is pulled from the United States, maybe Canada. You'd know more of that than me, Carrie. But really, the question that I would have is why would you want to do international prospect research? I mean, you really have to answer that question. Are there people in Asia or Europe that are going to have a propensity to give to your nonprofit? Maybe you're a international relief agency, etc. I just think that would be the first the question that I would answer. I did a lot of international fundraising for the university I worked with, primarily in China. But of course, these were people that were alumni of the university, and we had a connection with them, and it made sense to pursue that. But so anyways, I'll just leave it at that in terms of, I would really ask that question first. In terms of the quality of the data, Carrie, what would you say?
I would say that it's not as robust as information on, obviously, publicly available information in the United States. There frankly is no better resource for publicly, we spend all this time talking about privacy, but when it comes to this kind of publicly available information, U.S. data is better than anywhere else, so it is dramatically easier to inform your national prospect pool, but that does not mean that there aren't options out there for you for international research, and I think more and more there's a growing focus on it. I'm happy to maybe talk to Nicholas offline, or if others are interested. There are a set of shops that sort of specialize in different areas, so I think it depends on which region you're interested in and how you want to access them, but there are absolutely tools and groups out there that can help you.
Great. Thank you, James and Carrie, and to everyone who stayed with us to the end here. We really appreciate taking your time out of your day. You can see that James and Carrie and I are all available to answer your questions anytime. Just shoot us an email. There's tons of information on our website, on our blog, and we would also like to invite you to join us on our next free webinar. Giving USA, which was referenced earlier in this presentation, will be publishing their annual report on national giving this June, and we will be looking at that data from a Northwest regional perspective on June 24th. It'll be with our CEO and a couple other senior consultants here in the Northwest, so that should be a good one, June 24th at 10 a.m. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody, for participating, and good luck out there in the data world. And thank you, Carrie.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.